Hello everyone, Kevin here. We have an incredible interview today with Ron Ogden, who is very open about his life and career. As such, we have a content warning for brief mentions of child abuse and financial instability. Now, let's talk about role-playing games. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writing for Roleplay, a tabletop RPG podcast. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Kayla.
And joining us today is producer, actor, and DM for the Dungeon Run podcast, Ron Ogden. Ron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
On Writing for Roleplay, we talk a lot about writing for the people at your table. But with actual play, not only are you writing for your players, you're writing for your audience as well. It's a different world with different layers to think about, so we're very excited to be talking to Ron about it today. So, Ron, tell us a little bit about yourself, especially for those at home who haven't been familiar with your journey from start to finish. How did you get to where you are now?
Sure. Well, first, let me start off. I grew up in the military. I grew up in the Army. I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. My mom was a nurse at the base there, and throughout the years, I traveled a lot. Lived overseas for a very good amount of time before I moved back to the States around 12 years old. And 2 years after arriving in Augusta, Georgia, in the, early mid 90s. That's dating myself. I'm 43. So in the early to mid 90s, we landed in Augusta, Georgia, which is in the heart of the, if you have not heard it, the Satanic Panic. It's the Bible Belt. It was during the Satanic Panic. So D&D, TTRPGs, all that kind of stuff were very unfamiliar to me prior to that. And the individuals that I did end up finding who were that, it started with, and I've told this story before, especially on our own cooldown on the Dungeon Run, but a friend of mine by the name of Nathan Graybeal, who we're still friends today, and he watches the show. He, a new thing called eBay was just coming around, and his dad was a doctor, so they had a little bit of ability to use eBay, where someone like me had not yet been exposed to it. And so on eBay, he found someone selling a huge trove of AD&D materials, books, spell cards, you name it, everything that you could possibly ever need for AD&D play. And so Nathan and another friend of ours got together, and they asked me, hey, we want to go 3 ways in on this. My dad's going to pay for it. He just asked us to pay him. And I was like, sure, I'm down. I like reading. Nathan and I were in advanced classes together. So we kind of knew that this kind of stuff was up our alley. Yeah, I want to read about how to play a game. Yeah, let's do that. And so we got sent that. We split it 3 ways. I think we probably played 2 or 3 times total. This was right around when I was probably 15-ish. Would be 2 or 3 times total. And then until I was 18, for the next 3 years, I didn't play at all. Then I went to college. And when I got to college, I found my crew pretty quick. People, especially because someone was like, hey, do you like to go out into the woods and dress up as fantasy characters for a whole weekend and throw spell packets and hit each other with padded pipe? And I was like, that sounds risky, and I just got free from my very, very constrictive home, so yes, I'm in. And that's how I learned how to LARP. I learned how to LARP before I learned how to TTRPG, really, which I hear is usually the backwards way around of doing it. So that group of friends who invited me to their LARPing sessions also invited me to their game sessions, and that's when I really, really started getting into D&D. That was right when D&D 3.0 was being released, and they were all very excited about it, which is why there was a resurgence in it, and I got back into it. And since then, I haven't looked back. I've been a player. Mostly I've been a DM, just for, my friends and friends of friends and strangers even. Mostly been a DM, but I also have played on occasion, specifically because, I love that aspect. And I think I make the joke every once in a while that LARPing is what taught me how to act.
That's incredible.
I did it for 15 years, and it was every month for an entire weekend We'd go out into the middle of the woods in Georgia, and, out in the middle of nowhere at a state park. 150 people would play a world that was somewhere else, and we embodied those characters for. I didn't. I mean, when I went to sleep as that character.
That's incredible. I do love the intro line here of like you're in college. Someone's like, "Hey, do you want to go out into the woods?"
Yeah.
It's like there's two ways that conversation can go, and LARPing is
Well,
the good way.
I went to school up in northwestern Georgia at a college called Berry College, and Berry College at the time was known for two things. One, it was known for being the largest campus in the world in terms of acreage. It's like 128,000 acres or something like that, because they own most of the northwestern edge of Georgia, and it's used for scientific purposes for the most part in relation to the college. But it was also known at the time as the wettest dry campus in the world. Playboy had lovingly given it that name because when I entered the college, they still had demerits for if you had sex on campus.
Oh,
That's
kind of dry.
hysterical.
Yeah.
No, that kind of wet.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of wet campus. Right. I was already going into this collegiate experience thinking this is going to be ridiculous because, like, you can't control people's behavior, especially when they get out of home. I was 18 at the time and was, very hormonally driven too, because of course I was a teenager. But like, even then we all knew, like, this isn't going to work out. And our RAs knew it wasn't going to work out, because the first day we got there, they were like, none of that's happening. We're not going to give you any demerits for any of that. Like, that's your First Amendment right. You're welcome to do whatever you want. Enjoy. So luckily, though the college itself wanted to keep people constricted, the people that they hired to put in charge of doing that were like, no, that's dumb.
So it sounds like you came from a restrictive life, at least in the beginning, and then like being introduced to TTRPGs and then going into a new environment at your university, and even with the university having its own restrictive rules, like, not only all the other stuff that was going on, but also like going out into the woods and LARPing was a sort of creative escape for you.
It very much, looking back now, it very much was a rebellious act. I grew up in the military, and I've been very open about this. This is not a secret. If someone's a fan of mine and they've watched any of the dungeon run, especially any of the cooldowns, Ugo's entire story from season 1, I have said many times, is essentially a retelling of my brother and I's experience being abused. So we were abused as kids, physically, emotionally, the whole 9 yards. And largely that was driven because the individual that the military raised was just acting like the military that the individual that the army raised. Went through a lot of therapy, but once I got out of that situation, it was D&D, LARPing, all of this were rebellious tools for me. They became, I have a group of people who identify with me. It was very similar, even looking back now, it's very similar now that I'm older, to the same sort of experience I've experienced with queerness, in that I got out of something that felt so constrictive, and when I got out, I blossomed. And when I blossomed, I really learned more about life than I ever did before. And it was only because I was allowed to be who I was. And I experienced that much later on in life, when I realized that I was also pansexual. And so when I realized that, and started drawing all those lines back through, intense therapy, because when you're abused like that, you need to go to therapy. I mean, I think everyone needs to go to therapy. I wish we all could have a therapist that we trusted and spoke to. But especially in that manner, I knew, just looking at the data and the science, because that's what I really focused on in the world, what I could understand. Though I love this creative energy and creating and TTRPGs and LARPing, how I understood the real world was, here's the data that people have been identifying, and let's analyze it. And so for me, I started to realize very early on that was my key. My key was, okay, do the things that you love, but then analyze how they are impacting your life and make changes so that can occur as you get older.
Fascinating.
And I learned a lot of that. I learned so much of that through TTRPG play, role play specifically, and improv.
The thing that I feel like the underlying theme I think that we kind of keep coming back to with regards to gaming over the course of this podcast and in these interviews is that gaming is like it provides this sense of freedom and also expression for so many people, which is kind of wild, I think, because I don't know if that's really the stereotype that people have about tabletop gaming at all. Like I think the idea of like the rules and the structure and the math, people don't necessarily see it initially from the outside as that freedom of expression and whatnot. So it is fascinating to have your own journey also confirm that.
Well, and what's really fascinating that I learned it's fascinating to bring this up, Kayla, especially about math, because during this process of me growing and learning what are TTRPGs and learning, oh, there is structure and form to improv, and like, oh, we can actually use what we do every day because you don't wake up with a script. We talked about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you're doing when you wake up in the morning. You don't know what you're going to eat. You're making choices on the fly every day. So when I started to learn, oh, improv does that too, and the idea of improv is really that mistakes happen, learn from them, and use them to your advantage. A mistake in improv often is your greatest weapon or key, right? Like it is the way to really get people on your side. And I think that really struck with me pretty quickly when I started to study this stuff was, the reason I got into TTRPG play and LARPing is because I learned how to fail and not be embarrassed by it.
Yeah, that's always the biggest hurdle.
Yeah. Like I learned to fail and that it was okay. And that even though I still had that, tiny abusive man's voice in the back of my head telling me that I was worthless because I failed, that was the greatest. I didn't really lock onto it analytically until much later in my life, but that was what was saving me, right? In a real way. That was what was helping me like get through things was, oh, I can fail in this environment. And in fact, when I do that, people actually applaud because, ooh, that's an interesting story arc.
Yeah.
And for me, that was pretty solidifying. And to bring it back to the math thing that you talked about, like I was learning math at the time. I originally went to college to become a doctor. I wanted to be, quite literally, I wanted to be a brain surgeon. I'm fascinated by how the brain works. Humanity and generally neurons and how they function are still to this day something that very much fascinates me. But I couldn't handle if someone passed away because of my failure. And so I was like, you know what? What's next best thing? You know what's really good? Oh, here, look, computers. I've always been working on that because my stepdad was in the military and was working on computers when they first came on the scene. And so I got access to computers very early in my life. And so when I got into college and it was becoming this huge thing, I was like, okay, that's fine. I know how to do those things. I can do it. But at the same time, I could get 2 degrees. I had a unique situation of that if I started studying computer science, then I can also take the same amount of master or majors courses in math and spend only a year more of time and get 2 degrees, one in mathematics, one in computer science. As I was learning mathematics, I was learning that, mathematics does have rigorous set of rules, but that is only rarely. Mathematics is a philosophy. And once you get out of the combinatorics that we're so used to that our capitalist society sort of drives us into realizing and understanding and putting a lot of weight under, when you start to realize that mathematics is a thought process, that sort of started to, that's when I got really into the math aspect of Dungeons and Dragons. Especially because that was the forefront of what I was doing at the time while I was learning math was Dungeons and Dragons. I got into a lot of other TTRPGs later on, but D&D has been like the primary one that I've played in my life.
See, that's what I'm going to say next time I fudge a roll is, hey, mathematics is a thought process.
It really is, though, man. Like just the idea of modular mathematics, right? The first thing that you learn before they start teaching you number theory in college, at least they were at the time I was taking these courses. The first thing we learned was modular mathematics and how that works. And when we were and I'm in a junior level course in modular mathematics, and I'm like, guys, I know this stuff because I roll D20s every weekend. And I'm like, you want to talk about mod math? I just made 17 tables last weekend, focusing on this modular mathematics. And you know darn well that I thought about the percentages of how these things will roll out because I need to know in order to make sure that they're not going to go the wrong dungeon and get themselves in a situation that they're going to, not know what to do. So for me, math was always something I was very good at and easy to do. I just had a natural inclination and ability for it. I discovered as I got older. But when I realized that mathematics is not always this rigorous, strict thing, I went, ooh, so math can be rebellion? I'm into that. And I luckily had, for the first time in my life, a real strong and sensitive male role model that taught me, what men could be like if they weren't being the bear in the woods.
Oh, yes.
To use a recent moniker. And so that was really the first time my mentor, whose surprisingly name was Ron.
Oh, there we go.
Ron Taylor. Yeah, Ron Taylor. He's still a professor there at Berry College. He really helped me understand in a way that, okay, there were a couple people in my life that did that helped me understand that what I'm going through is not the reality and it gets better. First was my aunt, then my grandmother, and then Ron Taylor. And they all sort of helped me realize that, look, like it gets better. You just gotta do the best that you can, use the tools that you have to make your life as livable as possible. And then when you get the opportunity, be prepared and dash, be prepared to dash out of there when it's time. And that's exactly what I did.
So TTRPGs and mathematics were a large part of your journey of self-discovery, but I'm really interested to hear what was sort of the next step between you getting into TTRPGs and mathematics and LARPing, and then getting into the journey that is Dungeon Run.
So there's a long time between those two things. I played TTRPGs and D&D since then and have regularly. There was I went through my Vampire the Masquerade phase.
As one does.
Vampire, as one does. I got into Changeling. I got into Werewolf. I got into Hunter the Reckoning. I got into a lot of the White Wolf stuff because it was darker and it was, vampires and werewolves at the height of that in our, media and entertainment. And so, of course, I was driven in that direction, especially werewolves, these unassuming individuals who all of a sudden gain all this monstrous power was very cool for my, therapeutic role play on occasion coming from such a monstrous home. So as I progressed through my life, I graduated college. I ended up getting both degrees. I put myself through college, worked my way through college. I did like 21 hours of classes every week. I worked off campus for about 30 hours a week, and I worked on campus for 30 hours a week because that's how I paid my student loans. And so on average, during collegiate time, I got about 2.5 hours of sleep every night. And because I had untreated ADHD, and at the time they believe maybe some mania, I was able to do a lot of things in a very short amount of time. So in 5 years, 2 degrees, interned at NASA, starred in a couple of shows there, musicals and regular Shakespearean shows at the college, joined the improv troupe, traveled with them. I was doing a whole lot. And a lot of it was because I was sort of burning the other end of the rope, right? Like I'd been in this very constricted environment and was released. And just like a flame that is deprived of oxygen, when you give it a whole bunch of oxygen, it explodes and then sort of burns back down. And so the first couple of years of my life was I got oxygen finally. I could do a bunch of things. And eventually I got married and started to pursue my passion. I got a job at the credit reporting agency Equifax in the early 2000s. Left them due to some disagreements on how we handle business. I was a business analyst for the Equifax for a long time. Started working on credit card processing. I would actually program all of the systems that passed messages back and forth between your card issuer and the merchant that you're buying anything from. In fact, many of you listening to this program, I can say this with some degree of certainty, you probably still, just knowing how the financial industry works and that they never change anything once they pay for the code, if they don't have to, there's probably still code that I've written that everyone's, especially if you live in the South, that your credit card has touched at some point in the last 10 years, which is super cool for me because it's like, ooh, I had an impact on the financial world, and I only know it because I worked for a company that made those messaging systems.
You put your name on math.
Hey man, yeah, especially American math. Why not? Put some. Oh man, put some Easter eggs in there and see if anybody ever finds them. Again, it wasn't until probably about 5 or 10 years ago that I really realized that at heart I'm a rebel at heart. I try not to upset the status quo, but I certainly use comedy and the jester's thought process to bring. I like to do that to bring insight into how I see the world around me in my rose-colored glasses. But all of that led to in 2008, I started having trouble remembering words. I'm only, in 2008, I'm 27. Shouldn't be having memory issues like that. So I got checked up. And for those of you listening out here, if you ever get a medical diagnosis, always get a second, and I would even say sometimes a third opinion. Doctors are scientists, but scientists disagree on things. So the first diagnosis I got from my doctor when I lived in Georgia was I had 12 brain tumors and a tumor in the center of my hypothalamus, about the size of a chickpea. And it started to get pretty bad. That's why I ended up going to the doctors, because I would start to have auditory and visual hallucinations. My best friend, Adam Upchurch, who's still my best friend and has been since we were 19. Did you give you an example of how bad it got? I took the trash out at like 8 o'clock at night and put the trash in the trash can on the side of the house. And from behind me, my best friend Adam stepped out of the bushes and said, "Hey." And I turned around and he was gone. And I knew that wasn't the case because Adam was overseas in that day. He had just left like 4 days earlier. So it was definitely not him. And I heard him and saw him, and then it was gone. So yeah, that was real scary when you start to in real life hallucinate without the help of an illicit substance, and that scared me a lot. That's when I went to the first doctor. The first doctor told me, "Yeah, you've got 12, what looks like 12 lumps on the surface of your brain, and smaller ones, but lumps there, and one in your hypothalamus." The second doctor, which came about a month and a half later, told me that no, you had just have 12 lesions on the surface of your brain, but that chickpea size tumor in the center of your brain, that's what's causing the issue, and that's a thing that we have to solve. Well, that was a month and a half after I had a quarter life crisis, right? Like, I'm being told that probably doesn't look good, man. You may not be living very long. And it really kind of woke me up. It was another situation in which the world's trying to tell me something and I should pay attention. And so I paid attention and took the drugs the doctors told me to take, did all the work that the doctors told me to do the work, went to therapy. And on the other side of all of that quarter life crisis, I was divorced. I lost my home. Became bankrupt. And through all that, I decided that I had never given the shot that I wanted to. I had become a 6-figure a year programmer for, financial institutions in this country. And during 2008, with everything happening in Afghanistan, the war, all of that, I just realized I had not given the shot to what I really wanted to do with my life, which was to bring joy to others by entertaining them. And so finally I had the confidence. Hey, I survived a thing. Every day I have now is a +1. And so I became an actor. And that whirlwind, I decided to become an actor right at the beginning of when Atlanta was blowing up. I lived in Atlanta at the time. And so I got headshots as soon as it was like literally the week after I was diagnosed. I got headshots and sent them out to every agency I could find an address for. And I heard back from every single one. And they were all like, "Yeah, we'd like you." So I ended up being repped by the People Store, which is still a very big agency out of Atlanta. And my first job as a professional actor was with Terry Gilliam.
Oh my God.
That was my first foray into a real, like, I did a bunch of, 48-hour, 72-hour, 24-hour film races. I did a lot of, it was the height of when cameras became easy to shoot stuff. So it was the height of the first YouTube explosion. So there were a lot of things that I did, before I got into my first real commercial industry set. And that was with Terry Gilliam. And I was supposed to be there for 3 hours. All I was my entire role was I was a man wearing suspenders and a Speedo and all you saw was me from my neck down. And I'm a heavier dude, so that was the joke. And I was literally just lifting two very heavy barbells over and over for what felt like forever, but on screen was only for about 10 seconds. And that's all you ever see of me in that short. It was called The Legend of Hallowdega. It was shot for Talladega Raceway, and it was sponsored by Monster Energy Drink, and it was for their Halloween. Talladega used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to do a Halloween event.
So I need to ask for my own like visual reference.
Yeah,
you say you were wearing
sure.
suspenders and a Speedo.
Yes.
Were the suspenders connected to the Speedo, or?
Yeah, yes, they were. And
Okay.
if you need a visual reference, there's one on my IMDb. With me in the Speedo. So warning to those of you, if that is upsetting to you, seeing a mostly naked, heavyset man. It is on my IMDb, and I'm holding a thumbs up with Terry Gilliam in that Speedo that he put me in. So the whole reason I was telling you any of this is because, one, this is my first foray into acting. This is the first opportunity I get. And two, not only that, I was supposed to be there for, like I said, 3 hours. I ended up being there for 3 days. And I had to be there for 3 days because Terry Gilliam is infamous for shooting what he wants to, when he wants to. And I was the only non-major A-list celebrity actor that needed to stay for that long, because everyone else was there for a few hours and out. And so I got to, for about 3 days total, got to eat dinner with them, pick their brains about the industry, and I was a fledgling actor, so that was really helpful for me, especially someone who needs data and science, data and analyzation to really understand a thing. And it changed my life. In those 3 days, my life completely changed. Whether it was, I talk about, especially in the context of TTRPG play, I don't think there are any metaphors or, I don't think the world around you is telling you a story. I think we find the story in the world around us. We are the source of the story, so I think we find it. And in that moment, I found a story. I found a story of, hey, I am supposed to do this. I went through all of this hardship, discovered this thing in that hardship, and now I'm being offered the opportunity to grow in it and to see if I can follow the confidence that I had.
Yeah, I mean, you got like a grad level seminar in those 3 days.
In those 3 days, I went from knowing, I was always an actor, so I knew the basics of acting. I trained under that. I knew the basics. But in those 3 days, I got the full industry experience and knowledge, and I used that to my advantage. From that moment forward, I got very big in the Atlanta market. I was sort of one of the many handpicked individuals that people were brought in for very big things that were out of Atlanta. I worked with a lot of very big names. The last thing I did in Atlanta before I moved to LA was Alvin and Chipmunk Road Chip, where I was on set for 10 weeks. I don't know how many CGI or how many companies do this when they have fully animated characters, but the way that they did it for Road Chip is you have a reader, right? If your character is entirely CGI or animatronic, then you have someone read off the side to your actors in order to give them the impetus and all of the emotional things that go into real readings of things from a reader. Well, the way that they did it for Alvin and Chipmunk Road Trip is they hired improviser comedians. So me and the other two guys that were hired to play the voices on set of Alvin, Theodore, and Simon were all local Atlanta improvisers that auditioned for the part, but were known because we were doing theater in the area.
That is so cool. I didn't realize that's what they did.
Well, there's a reason you don't realize that. It's one of the very few allowable non-union jobs on set.
That makes sense.
So I did not earn SAG residuals or SAG healthcare while I was on that, but they did pay me a hefty sum up front. And that hefty sum up front paid for me to come out to LA. But while I was on that set, I also had a very unique experience. Because I'm the reader for Theodore, I am a crew member, but I am also treated as a cast member. And so I got to see, again, both sides, and I've been on a number of sets by that time. I had been brought out to LA to have my face captured in the same way that Captain America's face was captured, in the same rig. To be digitally replaced in a horror film called Plus One. And so had experience on how hard it is to find body doubles, especially when you have a unique body like mine. Took them a very long time. I I think they almost fired me from the movie, or at least, would not have me in the movie because it was hard for them to find someone. And I had a friend who just so happened to have a friend that looked a lot like me. And so we hired him, and that worked out okay. But I had to they flew me to Burbank and Santa Monica, and went into like a hotel room that was clearly had been set aside for a very long time, and went into this, what looked like the machine from The Fly. If you've ever seen that movie, it looked like the machine from The Fly. You sat in a chair and you had to act with, they showed you the scenes that they were replacing, and you had to act with just your face.
Huh.
Like you couldn't move. Your head had to be like locked in and stationary, and you had to act with just your face, which was fascinating and a blast. But that job on Alvin Chipmunk's Road Trip, I got to speak with the crew as much as I did the cast. And largely because you're also an improvising comedian for these lovable, chipmunks, people start to love you because of that, right? You're just saying, I'm improvising the lines. I have a little bit I have a script in front of me that I'm supposed to read to, but we were given a lot of leeway to just improvise. In fact, there's a scene that I will share with you after this podcast that they still use in their promotional materials where Theodore is captured by a little kid and sold by the antagonist of the movie to this little kid for $20. Theodore's brothers come to buy him back, essentially. And while he's doing that, the kid's like, but I paid $20 for this chipmunk. Look, he sings and dances. And on the day, they wanted a bunch of different types of songs and dances. And in the script, they had a couple of songs that they think that he might have sung. Well, I'm also an musical improviser. So at the time, I was at the height of my musical improv career, doing it on the weekends for pay in Atlanta. And so I was like, hey, this is a great opportunity. And so because the CGI team, the VFX team at the time was having such an issue with this particular shot because of how it was constructed and where the kid was, they had to do it probably 15, 20 times, which meant I had to improvise, because I did it on the first time, a new song every time. The last song I did on the last take was Baby Got Back. I sang it as... They put
can't
it
hear that in the
movie.
chipmunk voice.
You can, because they put it in the movie.
Yeah, no, I can.
And so to me, on that day when it was happening, we were on a golf course, like a miniature golf course that was like abandoned, and they had sort of rented out for a couple of weeks and rebuilt it up with their own stuff. We're on this miniature golf course in the middle of the summer sun in Georgia, and everyone's out there. The extras are on set. All of the actors for those scenes, which was most of the main actors, were on set for that scene. All of the chipmunks were there because every chipmunk was involved in this scene. Most of the working crew was on set at this day because of what was going on. And I got to essentially, for 15 takes in a row, entertain everyone while they waited for VFX to get the shot properly. Take after take, I was getting laughs. And I was like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. This would be great. I could do this. And so I used those 10 weeks, two of which they took us to Miami, and we spent 2 weeks in Miami. And I used that opportunity to network and to grow my contacts. I had a unique experience. I had learned from Terry Gilliam that one of the strongest things that an actor can do is make friends with extras. And the reason you make friends with extras is because, one, they're treated the lowest on the totem pole, and it's really, really sad. And it sucks. And I've been an extra and I know what it's like. But also, extras are in it because they just love movies. That's really most of the reason why extras are there, is they really just love movies, which I can totally relate with. And what Terry Gilliam said is, those people bring their friends to the movies that they help get made. And your job as an actor, you have one job in this business, and that's put asses in seats. That's your job. Mm-hmm. And it says sometimes that's because you're just naturally funny and the camera can capture that. And sometimes you are funny and you need to schmooze or use your social abilities in order to grow. I did not have the greatest social abilities. I often, because I grew up in such a constricted environment, like we talked about, I often said things that other people were like, you probably shouldn't say that out loud. And it was never intended to hurt anyone. It was always like, well, that's just how I learned how we speak about truth. I don't filter it. I don't need to. Like, why would I filter the honest truth from you? That would actually hurt you. If I tell you the truth, I'm trying to help you. That was before I was taught, like, oh, right, we're supposed to care about others' feelings. And, oh, right, I never was taught these things. I had to learn them through therapy. Yeah, okay. Now I'm learning how to be a human. And I'd learned most of that by this time, but there was still an occasion where I would say something and, I realized much later that ADHD was happening to me a lot. And that was really what I was bumping up against and never knew about. And so looking back, now I understand what was going on. But in that moment, I started to learn, okay, I can do this. And I started to ask people that I had sort of gained friendships and some communication with on the set, hey, Atlanta's really burgeoning with the film industry. Here's what I really want to do. What do you suggest? Like, more about this side of the industry. What do you think? What is your, can you share any insights? Using the opportunities I was given to grow my knowledge base was the only way I could survive anything. It's how I learn anything. And I was very lucky in that people shared that insight. And what they said to me was, you're intelligent, you're talented, you're funny, and you want to make something. You want to tell your own stories. Well, the reality of that was, at least the people that I talked to, was to do that, you have to be in LA, especially if you want to own any of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to have any monetary ownership over the things you create, then LA is where you got to go. So, finished that up. Wasn't too long after that, I packed up my entire existence and moved halfway across the country. All the way across the country. Which included, at the time, getting rid of my very extensive 4th edition D&D set.
No.
I had literally every book. I'm not even kidding. I bought every book. I still, to this day, wish I didn't have to do that. I also had to sell all of my Magic cards. I had Magic cards dating back to early 90s.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're talking early editions. Now, granted, selling those things made me a good amount of money, and I used it to get to LA, but I had to do that in order to get to LA. So when people ask me, hey, how did you get these unique circumstances? How did you get to work with Terry Gilliam? I took risks and I prepared myself. And that was it. Everything else fell into place. I can't tell you how it did that, but I do know, I've heard from other actors and listened intently when they say it's luck, but it's luck that meets preparation. So you're going to get your luck. If you stick with it long enough, you're going to get your luck. Just be prepared for it. So people are always asking me, hey, how did you do this, and that? And I will say this here, and I hope someone hears this someday in either direction. If you can do any job that you love and enjoy, and it's not acting, listen to me. Go do that job. You can only do this kind of creation if you truly, at the core of you, it is what you need to do. Because this is a unique job, and we have a union, and the union protects as much as possible, but the vast majority of the work that I've put out in my life, and many actors can say the same, they'll never get paid for. The art that we put out into the world, the vast majority of the time, we don't get paid for it. Name another job that's like that.
Podcaster.
Exactly. Which means you can only do this job if you truly love it and there's nothing else in this world that you can do and even, just sort of love.
I heard a very similar thing from a film professor back in college. And he was like a visiting professor, like an associate professor or something. Like he lectured one class because he was a fairly successful B-movie writer, director, producer. And I very much remember, like, the first day of class, he asked he's like, raise your hand if you want to be an actor, raise your hand if you want to be a director, et cetera, like going down the line. And he was like, maybe one of you will do it. If you think you could do anything, go do that. And then I remember him saying, like, and if that didn't discourage you, you might be the one person that gets to go do it. And I just remember, like, I remember when he said, like, don't do this, there was just a very loud, like, voice in the back of my head that was like, well, fuck you. And then when he was like, and then if you were like, well, fuck you at me about that, then maybe you can do it. And I remember when he, like, I consulted with him on my thesis film and stuff. And I remember, like, kind of on the last day or whatever that the film club was, like, meeting with him and stuff, he came in and he brought me, like, some DGA magazines and stuff and was like, here, like, you can have these ones, you know, and it was like you'll have to wait to get your subscription, but kind of like the implication of like one day you'll get your own. And it was really cool to sort of like have him kind of in the background of all of that. But yeah, no, same thing. Like, yeah, don't do this if you can do anything else. If you do this, it's because you need it to breathe.
Right, because it's who you are at your core. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think I was lucky that I was given that information, because I was like you, Kayla, in that when I heard that, I went, fuck you, right? The rebel inside me went, no, I'm going to do this. Watch me do it. And I luckily had a little bit of a sort of my world was set up that way because of the constrictive way that I was raised. When I gave up my 6-figure job, well, I didn't really give it up. I changed careers. You know, giving it up is like, oh, I wanted to keep it. No, I changed careers. But when I changed my career from a 6-figure a year programmer to a $0 a year actor, through the grapevine, I hear from my stepdad. My stepdad is livid and doesn't understand. Well, he can be livid all he wants. He didn't pay for college. I worked my way through it. I get to choose what I get to do. And so part of me was like, you know what? I'm going to do this just to throw it back in his face. Watch me.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I freaking did that. I was all over the television, especially in commercials in the South, but all over East Coast and even into the West Coast for a very long time. For a number of years, I was on many, many commercials that you were probably seeing online, on TV, all over the place. And so I got to throw that a little bit back in his face. But then I also realized that was my weakness. I was letting someone else drive my decisions. And so when I was faced to move to LA, it was a different thing. It was, okay, like this is a major thing. I have to move my dog, who was only at the time maybe 4 or 5. I have to move her across the country. I've got to get rid of all of my stuff, and then I got to move all the way across the country with zero support system. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. I don't regret a day of it. I'm glad I did it.
Just, real quick, I just want to say, spite's a good motivator, but love is a better one.
It is. It so is. That's absolutely true.
So you find rebellion in a new environment and in TTRPGs and in LARPing.
Yep.
You find a sense of purpose in theater and improvisation and acting, and you find a new direction as you move across the country to LA. So what comes next? Because you have this like triple threat of all of these different skills that you've built up that are perfect for what comes with Dungeon Run.
Well, I spent a little time in LA and realized that even though I was a big fish in Atlanta, LA is a whole different story. And I knew that going in.
Yeah.
I have a manager who's very close to me. We're friends, but he's also a manager. And, he's been helping me since the day I barged into his office and was like, hey, I'm trying to make something of myself. Will you help? And he was like, yep. Brad told me, hey, man, moving to LA means 10 years. 10 years before you see any kind of movement. Just giving you the straight facts. He knew I like data and analyzation. And I looked at that and I went, I'm good with it. I'm good with that. I can make that work. And so started auditioning for things and started landing roles, specifically in commercials here in LA, which is great because that's where the money comes from at the time in acting was from commercials. A former friend of mine put me on to an audition that seemed a little out of place, but talked about D&D. And I had been DMing a game for him on and off in various forms for 6 years, as well as our group of friends. And so we went to this audition together. We were a comedic duo, moved out here to LA together. We auditioned together. Luckily, they also wanted us all to audition individually. And so the characters that we did together were different than the characters that we brought to the audition for the individual auditions. And I brought a character that I played a couple of times, was just sort of this an orc. It was a self-reflection of me and my brother in our situation. It was always sort of a comedic character that I used to help tell the story of even those who appear the most harmful and hurtful are just little boys at the end of the day, right? The most violent of us are little boys. There's a little one inside of every single one of us. The one I understood at that time was the male boy in me. And so this was my way, as I always had been, sort of, I'm not very good at understanding other things, so I hit them because that's the only way I know to understand anything. And this is supposed to be a creature that you pity because of they've been taught the wrong things. And so I just did that. I told the story of, yeah, I went into a cave and my leader, who also just happened to be my dad, was there, and he started hitting me, and so I hit him back, and then now I'm chief. And that was, in a comedic form, that was what got me the callback for the dungeon run. And so I went in there and I played Uggo, and Uggo early was just more of a character who was not allowed to grow up because he grew up in a very violent household or a very violent clan, and was overthrown by some dark creature that he only sees, he was haunted. He was the haunted one. But he had this, I brought what I have, which is this sort of insightful, or at least what I call myself good at, which is insightful stupidity, which is dumbing something down beyond normal measure. And like Steve Carell, they do a lot of this stuff, right? Especially The Office, where this person is in charge of very serious things, but they are not a serious person. And that's how I played that character. The audition process was strange in that it felt like an acting audition, but it also felt like we were auditioning to be in summer camp. And so that was a little, there's a whole podcast episode or two I could talk about how the auditions for Dungeon Run went down. And at the time I didn't know. I was new to the LA scene, so I knew no one in the D&D or TTRPG space at the time. I was a new face. I came in and was hired. We were hired by Caffeine. Caffeine at the time was a sort of, not, I don't think officially a Fox subsidiary, but they were funded by Fox. And it was new at the time, like fully live interactivity was their whole thing. And so the Dungeon Run was supposed to be a fully live actual play D&D podcast, but also videoed and done with, it was billed as our actors are actors that we hired from Hollywood to do immersive character role play at the table. And that's how we were going to tell the story. And we were all very, very excited about that because we wanted to tell stories like that for our entire lives. And so we did it for 178 episodes, 4 hours each. In the first season before the pandemic hit, we had a full studio. We had dollies, and you talk about full television studio set. It was incredible to be a part of. I learned a lot, especially about parasocial relationships and what your message, what your story, what you do as a storyteller and how it can impact others. I saw for the first time in a real way how my story that I was bringing around with the help of the friends at the table and with Jeff Kanata, the DM, that I was impacting people that I never would have thought I've impacted. And a lot of them were veterans. A lot of them were military veterans with Uggo, because I told the story of what it's like to be in the Army and be raised in the Army. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of them were like, yeah, I deal with rage sometimes. And I'm like, of course, we all deal with rage. We all deal with anger. We all deal with some sort of, immense emotion. And a lot of what it's incredible, and humbling, the messages that you get sometime about people who tell you. And, there's also some parts where it's like, ooh, this is a lot. Because you'll get stories of people who are like, dude, you saved my life. Mm-hmm. And I believe them when they tell me that, right? I believe them that's true. I believe people when they say things like that. It's like, no, you saved my life in that moment because you helped me understand that, oh, I don't have to be this way. I can make a choice. These are the things that I was taught, but we still are people with choices and make, and those choices have consequences. And that was super humbling. And so then once the show ended, or was canceled by Caffeine, they were going to shut us down. Well, we 5 players and Jeff, the DM, petitioned Caffeine to allow us to license the world that we'd built for them. And they did. They were very kind with us. They were, I have nothing bad to say about Caffeine. I think Caffeine did the best that they could with the people that they had there, which I thought were all mostly very brilliant people. And look, they're still around. Caffeine is still around. They do, I think, more like they're the place to go to for like battle rap and sports outside of sports that don't get shown on ESPN. I think they're sort of
an ESPN 8 the Ocho situation.
Yeah, Yeah, right. Yeah, very much like that. And I think they've pretty much gone away from, again, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think they were going away from the interactivity aspect of the show because it's not sustainable, which is clear. So we petitioned them to get the show, to license the show, and they let us. And so we launched again before the pandemic was over, online only. We launched again and launched season 2. And now we just finished chapter 4 of season 2. We moved to chapters sort of halfway through season 2 because we started noticing trends changing.
Mm-hmm.
And since season 2, we started as a dual DM situation, but life happens, and people have to make choices and go where they need to. And Jared Check, who was co-DMing with me and helped me create the world of season 2, he had to step back for family reasons, as well as Katie. Katie had a son and during the show and decided to step back a little bit from everything that she was doing, let alone the dungeon run. And then over time, just things happen and people, they have to go their own ways and do what they really love. And so now of the original cast, they're all still involved and they all still appear here and there when they can, but really the lights every day are Morgan Peter Brown and I. And he sort of handles the organization and preparation of the episode, and I handle basically everything he doesn't. And that comes from it's so much. It comes from deciding cast members like a producer does, to storytelling, where we're going to go, what the next seasons and chapters are going to look like. I edit the shorts, merch store. There's a lot that goes into an actual play podcast that even one person, it's so much for 2 people to do. I can't imagine how one person might ever do it. But we work well together. Morgan and I have been tested together as business partners numerous times now. And every time we've come out stronger than when we went in. And, it's nice to have someone, again, we improvised together. And one thing that we learned about improv I've learned about improv is that you can only really do it well with people that you can trust wholly. And Morgan Peter Brown is probably one of the most trustworthy people I've ever met in my entire life. And so it's been an honor working with him so far. And I can't wait to see what else we end up bringing to the world.
That's really nice to hear. So, going into what it takes to make an actual play, you talk about how, like, acting in an actual play, especially as a player, you're putting your experiences into that character, and then they go out to the audience and people respond to it. And then, later on, you took the GM seat on Dungeon Run. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, like, what are some of, like, the big elements to think about when writing not only for, like, the people at the table, but also for the audience watching your table?
Well, here's the thing I have sort of come to conclusion about the TTRPG space, especially actual play, is we are essentially independent film. And my experience with independent film, which is fairly extensive, especially in the Atlanta region, was always a good one. You find, just like in improv, those, in my experience in Atlanta, they were the same industry. Independent film was the improvisers and comedians that were, working during the day. They were working on sets, and at night they would make their own things or go and do comedy. So for me, that energy always made sense. The energy of, we are here to do a collaborative thing and tell a story together, collectively. I might be the producer, but I'm not the one in front of the camera right now. I mean, I often am. Even when I produce, I often am in front of the camera in some way, just because you would hire people with their expertise regardless. But when I'm producing for the Dungeon Run and GMing, a lot of it is setting up situations so that group of friends, the characters, that group of friends can make choices and discover things about each other, and then we move forward and then change the world a little bit and let those things inform what they've already been talking about and changing themselves, just like our real life friends, right? Just like our real life stories. Like, how did Ugo learn not to be violent anymore? And that the piece, looking at violence as a weakness rather than a strength, and how does that change his decision making, and how does that impact the people around him because he's changing decisions in that way? And for all characters like that. So for me, that was really important. As we move forward, especially for season 2, is that, okay, I am producing, but I'm also GMing. So I know that at the end of the day, all we really need to do is create an interesting, fun time for people to get lost in for a few hours. ultimately, that's the most simple form of what an actual play is, in my opinion, if you ask me. I'm just trying to tell a story that someone forgets about their life for just a couple of minutes, if not maybe a couple of hours, bringing joy and entertainment to complete strangers.
There we go.
Get a lot out of that. I get a lot out of that. I like to bring joy to others. All my jobs now, when I search for jobs, because look, as an actor, even as someone who's been relatively successful and has been in the top 10% earning of SAG-AFTRA, I still need other jobs. That's what this job is about. That's what an actor is. I've been in the top 10% earning actors in SAG. I had enough to afford the very expensive healthcare that comes out of SAG-AFTRA. That is not sustainable for most actors. Just to tie into the recent zeitgeist of like, wait, actors, even the most famous actors, aren't rich. It's like, no, we're not. Not how that works. Yep, looks glamorous, ain't glamorous. Is glamorous in some cases. Not saying that it isn't fun and there isn't some reason to do it, but for the most part, it is hard and you don't get paid what you should get paid for your art. But all that being said, now suddenly I realized that I was getting to do exactly what I moved to LA for. I moved to LA to create stories and own part of what I was making. Now, I didn't own anything yet. The only thing I really owned was, okay, I have a fan base, and that fan base also follows me. It is not caffeine that they're following. They're following me. Cool. This is great. I've earned their trust in bringing them entertainment. And they're many of them, so thankful for them, are willing to, shell out some money for that, especially when I try to do charity stuff, which I often do. At the end of the day, for me, it was getting this group of people around. I think we've talked about this before. It might even be you and I, Kevin, where we talked about there's the story at the table of the characters, and then there's the story of the players at the table.
Yeah, that's something I find fascinating with actual plays is like is, like you said, there's the story of the game and then there's the meta narrative of the players at the table. And there's a lot of people who come in for both stories. Like they're not only here for, the adventures of this D&D party, they're also here for the dynamic of like the players at the table having a good time.
There's a reason reality television is a thing.
Yep.
Absolutely. People like real life drama as much as they like, fantasy drama. And look, I'm a fan of drama. We all can have, I'm sure, can recognize when we've seen, especially any TikToks or if you were as old as I am, World Star, and seeing things and going, oh, what did that guy say to that other lady? Like, whoa. So that's TikTok in my experience lately is like, oh, wow, what is happening? Wait, who's mad at what? And like, what happened?
We love gossip.
Yeah, I mean that's why reality television makes so much money. Absolutely. People as human beings, we love politics and we love gossip. As much as we say we don't like those things, we do. We're social creatures. We're driven for that stuff. That's why fantasy stories work, is because there is drama. I think I even was watching I watched one of your snippets. And you were talking about, hey, I can love Aragorn and be anti-monarchist. Like, I don't have to love a king just to love Aragorn. Like, yeah, my fantasy elves, they want that king. He deserves it. He's been waiting. But I don't have to be like, I want that in my real life. Like, no. But we love drama. And reality television gives us even more of that, like, ooh, this might actually be kind of real, so the stakes are a little higher. It's also fantasy written material, like.
Oh yeah,
it's a performance, but it feels like there's like emotional stakes there.
Right. And that's because of the illusion that is being created, right? I'm giving you the box in the window to look through. I made a diorama when I was 9 for the first time. It taught me a lot about, hey, we can make anything look like anything.
It's my dad and my brother are both very into sports. And one thing I have noticed from a lifetime of listening to them talk about sports is the way that in this, it's supposed to be, like just a game, and yet there is always a narrative within something that is supposed to be straight up competition. It's like, no, there's a story. There are main characters. There's drama and stakes and conflict, just like in anything else.
Yep. Monday Night Football taught me that. I never was into, I don't want to be disrespectful and say sports ball. We all have our things. We're all allowed to be nerds about what we nerd about. But I I played football in high school. I was never really into it. I was doing it because it was a thing I never experienced and I wanted to see what it was like. I went from band to musical theater to football to, I've always done things and experienced as much as I possibly could. Others took that as you don't have any respect for these institutions. And I'm like, quite the opposite. I want to learn all of these institutions and cut away what I don't need.
Yeah.
And so sports for me was always like, oh, you like the drama of this. This is just gladiatorial arenas. I feel the same way you do about sports. I feel the same way about Hercules and Perseus as you do about that guy who plays for the Bills over there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until much later when the explosion of fantasy football happened where I'm like,
this is fan fiction.
This is Final Fantasy
fanfic.
football.
It is also D&D with real people's stats.
Yeah.
And so when I realized that, I was like, okay, that was when I started to get a little bit stronger and more open about my D&D playing, even though I still lived in the South. And the Satanic Panic has sort of, especially when I got into college, it sort of waned because of just the nature of history. But still this day, it's like, yeah, watch Monday Night Football. I mean, Monday Night Football doesn't exist anymore, although it is coming back. It doesn't exist anymore, but that's when you got there's a football. There's a team. This guy on this team, he's gone through heavy, hard-hitting things. Now he's going to take everything he's learned to come back to you so that you can see him get hit full on, helmet to helmet, and maybe one day when he's older, we can all say, oh, how sad it is that he has all of these brain problems. But you had a great time, and that was some great storytelling, and he made a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it was worth the brain problems.
But it's a story, man. That's a story itself. That's a villain. That's Marvel, but it was somebody's actual life. Like, that's the same stuff. So of course, when I started seeing that, it was like, I'm not into football. That's okay. I'm just into a different type of storytelling. That's all it is. You're allowed to have your storytelling. You find your niche. Find your niche. You do it.
Yeah.
We did.
Absolutely.
That's why we're even here. The
Yep.
reason we're even here is because we finally realized, like, no, hey, you want to have a game of tennis where you use a ball that has no bounce, and it's not really tennis. It's just really big ping pong paddles, and you dress up in tennis wear. You can do that.
I think you just reinvented pickleball.
That's pickleball. I do enjoy pickleball.
Hey, I enjoy pickleball too. I'm just identifying.
The family Christmas pickleball tournament was dramatic and high stakes.
Here's how this is the stuff I love. This is where I grab stories from. This is how I love to tell stories through the lens of dungeon, through the dungeon run. I take real life stuff and just put a fantasy spin over the top of it. You'll mix the stories around because you don't want the characters to be the same and all that kind of stuff. But
of course,
it's always been fun for me to like take real life stuff and then just, hey, let's paint away this thing and add that thing and put some color over here. And this is the kind of stuff that I like to do, where it's like, we have real world problems that we could teach people who you see so many people online who go, la, 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 don't tell me nothing. I don't want to hear nothing. I don't want to hear nothing about I have my person that I like. I have my person that I like. No, can't tell me anything different. But then they go and watch stories that tell them different. And they go, you know what? That story was really good. They had a good point. And it's like, we were literally just trying to have this conversation in real life that the story just taught you. Why do we need fantasy and comedy to get to teach anyone something, to help them, not even teach, to help them discover something on their own? Why do we need that? I still don't know that answer. I just know that it's a fact.
I think the part of it is the fantasy or the comedy sort of provides a little bit of a separation to allow you to be an outside observer looking in on the situation.
Stakes are lower.
Yeah, and so it's easier to observe than it is to be introspective.
Yeah.
But once you have that observation, it's a seed and it'll grow into that introspection, I think. Because constantly, I'll talk to people who aren't really into genre. You know, they're like, oh, I only read nonfiction. I don't like fiction. I don't like fake things. Or I only read literary or contemporary fiction. I don't read genre fiction. You know, I'm not into the elves or the ghosts or anything like that. I like real stories. And I'm just shaking them by the shoulders. And I'm like, you think that this interplanetary conflict doesn't have real life stories in it? It's all there. Every horror book is a book on grief. Like, it's, you know, it's so personal and visceral. But it does provide that little separation to sort of make it safer for some people, I think, to kind of go deep into that.
But that's what I love about what we discovered, especially in the industries, you know, podcasting, streaming, TTRPGs, actual play, and all of this stuff is we're all still just take away all the fancy electronics, all the fancy tech that we've discovered. We've just made the fire more technologically advanced.
Yeah.
And we're all just sitting around that campfire in the middle of the woods trying to stave off the fear that our brains are creating about what's happening in the woods that we can't see. And instead of using all that energy to fear and wonder what's happening in the dark, we look towards the light and we go, oh, I know what's happening. This is what's happening for me.
We're a storytelling animal.
Absolutely. It makes every sense to me why we have wrapped our economies around those things. Whether we meant to or not, whether intentionality or not, that's what's happened.
This has been a genuinely inspiring talk, Ron, and I'm very glad to have that you're here to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is incredibly exciting. So, real quick, before we leave, we like to give recommendations of like tabletop RPGs to our audience. What are some of your favorite? What are some of your favorite TTRPGs?
Now, you know, one of my favorite TTRPGs is 4th edition D&D, and there's a group of people out there who are going to be very upset at me that I just said that.
It's making a comeback, man. They keep bringing back those mechanics in like other games.
Look, I get it. It's it's MMO meets a TTRPG, and like as much as that makes me feel like a quote unquote dumbing down of a gameplay, it's just a different direction. I just like those things. Look, I don't play Warhammer. I don't. Mostly because I never could afford to play Warhammer.
Who could?
Right. Especially if you grew up poor like I did in the army. But I certainly know that chainmail is sort of where D&D started, and chainmail was essentially Warhammer, but for fantasy figures only. So, like, it's okay that people like Warhammer. It gives them a thing to paint. Look, I love to paint. I'm looking at...
Love to paint.
200 plus bottles of paint right now, 3 boxes that I have to shoot unbox videos for because I'm fascinated by what all the tech that's been coming out in even painting. There is a niche and a space for everyone. There really is. I'm not surprised that the TTRPG space is 1, so young, and 2, so rainbow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised because that's what it was when I was learning it. It just was very secretive because you couldn't tell anybody, 1, that you went on weekends and cast spells in the woods, and 2, you couldn't tell them that you were gay or a lesbian or transgender. I had friends that were all of these things, but we all were different people when we walked out that door because society forced us to be different people.
Yeah, it ties into gaming as like rebellion and subversive.
Absolutely. And it was. And it wasn't until, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, especially lately now that I'm having a son.
Oh, congrats.
I think the hormones naturally start to make you think, like that. But for me, yeah, that's absolutely what it was. It's like gaming has always been subversion. It's always been queer for me, getting away from the status quo and finding the people that you meld with, no matter who they are.
It's very punk rock.
Couldn't agree with you more. And there's a lot of different corners to this space. So, Ron, where can people find you?
You can find me obviously on the Dungeon Run, youtube.com/the Dungeon Run. You can also find us on the dungeonrun.tv. If you want to find out more about stuff that I do, voiceover, acting, comedy, painting, mini painting, any of that kind of stuff, you can find me over at therealrogden.com. I'm also on all socials at therealrogden. Please check out the Dungeon Run. If not for me, for the likes of Serena, Josephine, Carrie, Adam, and Morgan. Our cast is incredible. We have a lot of different, a wide ranging of cast mates that have joined us for other games as well. So we have a lot of different options there for you to consume. And I think right now we have over almost, I think we're getting close to 1,000 hours of consumable content.
Ooh.
Well, you heard it here, folks.
Nice.
Definitely check out Dungeon Run, and you can find the links to Ron Ogden stuff in the show notes.
I do have one thing that I got to plug. If I
Go
don't,
for it.
They'll kill me. So there is a campaign, D&D 5e campaign book coming out. That is, I designed a pirate captain, a ship, a first mate, their crew for this campaign book called Blood, Rum, and Thunder.
Ooh.
Blood, Rum, and Thunder. Super interesting. I created a high-level pirate captain and his crew and first mate. I'm very proud of this thing. So please, if you guys will be kickstarting July 2nd, I believe is when we start the Kickstarter. I'm also joined by Todd Stashwick and some other amazing authors that I can't remember off the top of my head right now because I did not prepare myself because I'm an improviser with ADHD. But that is coming out very soon. You can catch them on Escape. It is coming out by Escape Plan Games.
Awesome.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
I love pirates. That sounds sick.
And that's such a great name. I can't get over it. That's a great name.
It really is. Blood, Rum, and Thunder. It's very punk rock, as you were talking about earlier. And I cannot wait for you to see this pirate because I went a whole different direction with a captain. And I think people will really like it. I'm very proud of what I made for them.
Can't wait to check it out.
That's sick. I'm excited.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an incredibly exciting conversation.
Please have me back anytime. You guys are very easy to talk to, and the stuff we talk about is, as you said, very deep and inspiring, and I love talking like that. So
glad to hear it.
What a wonderful morning.
Yeah.
Kayla, you want to lead us off?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's see. If you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got the links in the show notes. We'll also have the links to Ron Ogden's socials and Kickstarter and all of his links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content stuff like extra episodes, access to the private Discord. Check it out. Writing for Roleplay is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knutson. It is edited mostly by Kevin because Kayla volunteered to do other stuff. Which I, coming up with a running gag that I can't remember what the gag was supposed to be today. We post a new episode every Tuesday. See you next week.
See you next week.